even though a lot of people are like, well, I can't go do that work because I don't have all those skills, you start with your foundational clinical knowledge and experience, and then you gain those other skills along the way. And what we have said is that we went through a lot harder things to learn. It's way harder to get through medical school and training and all of that clinical knowledge, which is the foundation that you already have, than it is to be like, well, how do I now support sales or something like that? Welcome to Startup Physicians. Please like and follow our show to join our community of physicians who are reimagining healthcare delivery. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Startup Physicians. This is your host, Dr. Allison Kerfman, and I'm here with my guest, Dr. C.K. Wang, who is a medical oncologist with a very interesting story. So thank you, C.K., for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Allison.
Awesome. Well, we were connected by one of my previous podcast guests, Rebecca Mixad. So if anyone hasn't heard her episode, you should scroll back and listen to that one too. But I am very interested in your journey, CK, because similar to me, it sounds like you were a little bit plucked out of traditional practice and brought into this world of startups and innovation. So can you just kind of talk to us a little bit about your early career journey and in more the traditional sense and what sorts of things you were interested in?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was in full-time oncology practice, in private practice in the North Texas area for a little over 12 years, up until about 8.5 years ago, when I started to understand that there's a larger ecosystem out there beyond day-to-day clinical practice. And at that time, looking at the challenges that faced oncology, which are still present today, which was the amount of workload, the amount of work, as well as the vast amount of new therapies coming onto the market. I had the sense that, practicing oncology just will become increasingly more complicated, if not unsafe, unless you're really up to date with all of the new developments, right? And it was at that time that I started developing a desire to want to make an impact in the field from I would say a larger scale. So outside of those four walls and of my clinic. And coincidentally, at that time, I started receiving numerous outreach from IBM Watson Health that was really confusing to me at that time. And so one would say that where I was in my career and just what had happened in terms of all of this outreach, it just was the right timing for me.
Yeah, I loved your story before we started recording that you started getting emails from IBM Watson Health and you deleted them, correct?
Multiple of them. Yeah. Yes.
And one of the things you said to me, you said, I have no idea how they found me. So what were they looking for?
Yeah, they were looking for clinicians. Well, first of all, when I was deleting all of those emails, I didn't really read into what they were looking for. I just assumed IBM.
You thought it was junk mail.
Yeah, I'm like, IBM me. Oh, I don't know why junk, right? Until I started looking more into it. And they were looking for oncologists with clinical knowledge to support their what they were developing, what they had on the market at that time, which is Watson for Oncology, which is a platform to help clinicians, medical oncologists, make treatment decisions.
That's awesome. Yeah. So it's funny because you said, I don't know how they found me. I've been on the other side of that when we were launching my company and we had to hire a lot of clinical talent quickly and had a recruitment firm supporting us. And I definitely remember going to meetings a couple of times a week where they would come with a deck of candidates that they found on LinkedIn and, creating profiles of this is the type of person we think would be best for this job. And so You said you did have a profile on LinkedIn at the time, so I would
Yes.
be willing to bet that they probably found you through LinkedIn, but or
And
maybe
that
they
would make
were,
sense. That would make a lot of sense. So
but but you had to open the email to
I
actually
did.
connect with them. Um, and what was that interview experience like?
It was the longest series of interviews, and as I shared with you earlier when we were talking, is I look back and I can say jokingly that I probably could write the book of what not to say. You know, when you're looking for a brand new opportunity. However, I do believe that it was what I said that essentially got me hired. And I started out with, I don't even think I gave the manager, my hiring manager, much of an opportunity to speak or tell me, or get to know me. I just launched into a hi, it's great to talk to you, but I just want to let you understand who I am so that I don't waste your time. Right. And then I started listing, just telling her, I'm a full-time clinician. I'm an oncologist. I know nothing about computers. In fact, I have computer problems all the time. The only thing I probably know how to do is turn on and off my computer. Right. And, and then
So you're thinking IBM probably wants someone who's very tech savvy,
one would think, right?
but what were they looking for?
She said, I totally get it. And that's why I'm talking to you, because we need clinicians, we need oncologists in practice with clinical knowledge, because our customers are clinicians. And we've acknowledged and learned that the most effective way to engage other clinicians is with clinicians.
Absolutely. That is a function I have supported at multiple companies, clients, and companies that I work for. And it's true. We bring credibility and trustworthiness, and obviously would only want to put our names behind something that we trust.
Absolutely.
But that makes a lot of sense, especially if that's a direct value to them, is to reach oncologists.
Absolutely.
So you left private practice to go work for IBM Watson Health.
That's right. That's right.
And what sorts of things did you do there?
Yeah, so I was part of. So my initial role was to be part of a global. Think of it as a, well, we call it clinical adoption, but it's more of a client support team. Our clients who are on a global basis, and as I stated, these oncology practices where healthcare systems would license the platform, and my team is responsible for onboarding them as well as supporting them throughout. And that position, that role expanded with time. And so I traveled frequently around the world, visiting oncology practices, healthcare systems throughout the world, trying to help them use this new platform, which was AI based, that was supposed to help them make treatment decisions. But very rapidly, because I was one of the few oncologists within Watson Health at that time, I was able to branch out quite rapidly and support our sales team, our marketing team, learn more about AI than any clinician should ever know about AI about 8.5 or 9 years ago. So that was what I was brought in to do, but then subsequently ended up doing a lot more.
One of the things that we've talked about is you were recruited for your clinical knowledge, which is the foundation, which is irreplaceable, which is, what brings so much value. But then you're able to pretty quickly stack on a whole lot of other skills that were able to be applied in new ways. And it was the fact that you were a clinician, you were an oncologist, and you could talk to the marketing team and help them figure out, like, don't say this, do say this, whatever sorts of skills that you were developing. And even though a lot of people are like, well, I can't go do that work because I don't have all those skills, you start with your foundational clinical knowledge and experience, and then you gain those other skills along the way. And what we have said is that, like, we went through a lot harder things to learn. Like, it's way harder to get through medical school and training and all of that clinical knowledge, which is the foundation that you already have, than it is to be like, well, how do I, support sales or something like that.
Right. And actually on that topic of supporting sales, this is something that I taught my team, that I still do share with any clinician who may be hesitant to support sales. And I tell them, I said, look, think back on your clinic, your practice. I'm sure there are times it was easier for me as a medical oncologist, because I would say I don't think anyone really volunteers to receive chemotherapy, right?
Right.
But I'm sure every clinician has been in that situation where you've had to convince the patient to do something that they didn't want to do. Guess what you're doing? You're selling something.
Sales.
Right?
I know. We have this like negative perception about sales because we think about like MLMs and people trying to sell you like Tupperware and annoying things. But when you're trying to like sell a vision, it doesn't feel that same way. Like I never felt weird at all supporting sales for my first company, because I knew it was like, oh my gosh, can you imagine if we, which is the name of the company, Imagine, if we could support children with medical complexity more. And the buyer was the Medicaid company. It wasn't even the patient. But it didn't feel like sales. It was like, oh my gosh, we have this amazing vision of how we could change healthcare, and just aligning stakeholders around that. And yes, there is contracting involved, but sales is something that, we have to realize is just how we expand our reach and help get these more innovative products into the market. And it sounds like you were supporting a very cool, like, AI tool for oncologists. So you were talking to your own colleagues and being a credible expert that kind of bridges both worlds.
Absolutely. And I think that, as you know, especially right, if the company, and I'm assuming most of the times when companies hire clinicians, is that they're in a clinical space, right? Is the fact that it is easier for those who are clinicians to put him or herself in the position of the customer, right? Because they're a clinical entity. And think about what the value proposition of this solution to you yourself, because that's exactly what you would tell those potential customers.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. You're one of them. And
Absolutely.
so when people are like, oh, I don't know what skills I would have or what I would do with startups, it's like, well, how do you do with talking to your colleagues? Like, could you talk to your colleagues about a new product or model, or, for you, it was a tech platform. And you had to believe in it to put your name behind it.
Absolutely. That point is critical, right?
Yes.
And once you believe in it, or if you believe in it, and you understand what it's supposed to do, I think the selling process becomes much, much easier.
Yes, absolutely. So what other things did you support there?
So I think one of the more interesting things that I supported was product development.
I was about to ask about that.
Yeah. And so my team had to develop a product feedback loop from the customers to our product team, and I was the clinical lead for that. And it's fascinating. It was a fascinating process, because obviously you're receiving complaints and feedback, trying to work through them to understand which ones are real, because there are times they're just complaining for the sake of complaining, right? And which ones are truly problems. And because that system was touching patients, is understanding and trying to be able to assign, different levels, to these problems in terms of how quickly they need to be resolved, right? Some things could be very critical, especially if, let's say, the solution is recommending a completely wrong treatment, right? Don't want that. So thinking through that, and then on the back end, talking to our product and our engineering team. That was a skill set I had to develop. I've never spoken to folks who are of computer background and product background, and so that was something I had to learn. It was a lot of fun and I thoroughly enjoyed it, but it definitely required a different way of communicating.
Definitely different skill set. I actually think that development, working with product teams and dev teams it's like one of the most fun things we can do as clinicians is really filter insights and help contribute to the direct build of something new.
Absolutely. And I think it's also the opportunity to, instead of just doing your day to day, to think about, what may be, right?
Yeah,
What
because it
could be the
doesn't
future.
exist yet.
Exactly. And I think that's a lot of fun. And then also understanding that, it's okay to fail because we most likely will fail, but we learn and we move on, right? And I think that's something that we don't.
We're not great at that
No,
as
we're not great at that.
physicians.
Exactly.
Is like I think some of the people in my life who have been in product have taught me a lot about MVP, which is your
Yep.
minimum
Yep.
viable product, and they're like, yeah, we try and get a C plus thing out there to at least get it into the world and start getting feedback. And so I tell physicians, like, when you're involved in any sort of product development, your role is to make sure that quality and safety and health equity is like the foundational need. But if you put a product out there that's a C plus in that, like, the buttons don't look great, or maybe it's a little glitchy, like, we like to do A plus work as
Yes, absolutely.
physicians.
Yep.
And so I have seen physicians work with development teams in a not so great structure where the physicians were continually wanting more and more features and more this and that and the other, and becomes a multi-million-dollar project very quickly.
Absolutely.
And I've seen products that never launched because nobody ever made the MVP.
So
um,
yeah, you bring a very, very good point because I had to get used to that in the beginning. I mean, MVP. I'm like, do you really want to put that out? The very first time I realized what MVP stood for, right? And I'm like, I don't know about that. And also just even this rule of addressing 80%, right? And perhaps just leaving the 20% on the side, this 80/20 rule. And there was a lot of new concepts I had to learn, but also get used to, because to your point, we as clinicians, we would never do anything just 80% of the way, right?
right.
Yeah. Yeah. And also at the same time, I think the
But we also don't iterate quickly.
no, we
We're not
don't.
very agile.
We
Yeah,
don't.
so it's
We don't. And then I think when we practice, is we address one problem and we move on to the next problem. But that's not how it works. In companies that have products, the products are, you're continuously working on it. You could be working on many different things concurrently, right? So those were new challenges that I had to learn how to address, and figure out how to work differently.
but again, your exposure to that environment and those opportunities allowed you to keep building additional skill sets. And that, I think, makes you incredibly valuable. Now, not only are you a trusted clinician who can talk to clinicians and understand how sales teams work, and now you understand how product teams work and how business development and marketing and all of that works. And so all of a sudden you become this sort of multi-tool with the clinical background that can work with, you could work at all sorts of different companies.
Yeah, I would hope so, and I would say so. I would say yes, technically, but I think it's about seeking those new avenues of growth, right? Venture out. I think in the clinical space, we really very quickly we just assumed one role many times, and for many clinicians, that is your role until you either leave your, I guess, your position, or when you quit practicing, right? But I think once you step outside of the clinical space, I would say there's so much opportunity out there, but it all depends on what you are interested in and the effort that you put into it, right? And just be open to opportunities that come your way. And I think I share with you that a lot of times my instinct when it comes to anything new is to maybe think about saying no or have the urge of saying no, but I've
Like deleting the IBM email.
that's right, that's right. But I think learning to say yes and understanding that even though you're not sure exactly what it is, that you have the confidence that you can grow into that role or complete that task. I think that is invaluable in any company, in any scenario. And I think that's really when we all grow, right?
Absolutely. And I think, sometimes it can be hard to adopt that growth mindset. But for those of us that want something more, we have to think outside of what we've always done. So we should be pursuing opportunities to do new things, even if they're uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I'm uncomfortable like a very large portion of the time. So
Same here.
So after it sounds like you supported a lot of different functions at IBM Watson Health, and hopefully you got a little better at computers while you were there.
A little bit.
Not so much.
Just a little bit.
A little bit. And then tell me about your transition to your new company, or I guess it's not very new anymore, but
yes,
the company you work for now.
Yeah, no, I've been at Coda for 6.5 years. Coda is very different than IBM. IBM was huge, multinational, global company. Coda, we're small. We're founded by oncologists, 80 full-time staff, and I've been here 6.5 years. We focus on oncology real-world data, and what brought me to Coda was at that time when I was with Watson Health, I was giving a lot of talks about AI and the foundational principles of AI, which back then is still very similar to what they are today, which is AI needs to be trained on good data, right? So there's this clinical platform to help clinicians make treatment decisions. But IBM was in the position, they had the position of not wanting to own clinical data. So, of course, in my mind, I was struggling with the fact that, okay, well, I'm trying to sell a platform that's clinically based. I'm talking about AI, but I really don't know much about data and how clinical data comes about, right? And I had known about Coda. IBM had a partnership with Coda at that time. I was lucky. I was made aware of Coda's need for a senior medical director, and I applied and came into Coda. So that's how I made that transition. I'm still here today.
Awesome. And what sorts of function? And now you're the chief medical officer, correct?
That's right.
And so, what sorts of functions have you supported within this business over the past 6 years?
Similar to IBM, everything. I think I do a lot more strategy nowadays, of course. But I think one of the great things about being in a small company is you get to learn the business side of a company rather than, I think, the end stage or the kind of more
the silo.
You're right, siloed day to day, right? I think being a small company, I'm exposed to a lot of things. I have my medical team today. We support sales, our product team, engineering team, very similar. But I think what I am exposed to is the financial aspects of a company, right? Fundraising, talking to investors, right? Talking to boards, my board members, managing, my board, and then obviously, reporting to my CEO. So I would say very similar to what I was doing, but being involved a lot more in the strategic component of the company as well.
That's amazing. I also think that you're able to infuse that clinical knowledge into all of those areas, and sometimes the financial side of things is what initially intimidates doctors because they don't feel like they have that exposure or experience. I do think this is something you can learn. The other thing about finance is that if you can make a concept make a lot of money, it will be able to affect a whole lot more patients positively. So I think that even though sometimes as physicians we shy away from financial stuff because it might make us feel weird, especially in fee for service, but as we learn how to create models that can sustain themselves, that are like viable business models, that actually unlocks the opportunity to actually scale and grow something so that it can, affect as many patients as we hope to affect.
Absolutely. I would say that when I started being involved in the financial discussions, fundraising, to your point, Allison, I was very intimidated. I'm talking all of a sudden to private equity firms, and there are people who are of finance background whom I've never really dealt with I dealt with them a little bit, but not to that extent, right? But also convincing them that this is a good investment. And I will say that how I guess who brought me back to my center was one of our good friends who is a CFO. And I just randomly, raised this concern about, hey, look, we're going through fundraising and, the pitch and all that. And he's like, hey, look, here's the thing. They know you're a clinician. You're in a clinical company. You know the vision better than anyone. You know the clinical aspects better than anyone. They're not going to ask you about the spreadsheet, the P&L, all that stuff. You have your chief financial officer. That's their job. But they will look to you for that clinical guidance, and they will see you as a clinical expert, and you are the clinical expert. So believe in yourself and speak from a clinical perspective, and everything else you'll learn along the way, and everything else you have a team that will jump in to support you. And he was absolutely correct. And the instant that I guess got that in my head, like this is my task. It just made things a lot easier.
Mm-hmm. And they're just people.
They are just people. And then,
they're just people.
Yeah,
I have talked to a lot of important people, and they're all just people. And a lot of the communication skills that we gain as doctors dealing with, I mean, gosh, you're an oncologist. You deal with some of the hardest conversations ever that these finance guys couldn't even imagine having. Like, we have skills that translate. And then it just struck me as kind of funny while you were talking. I was realizing one of the reasons they hired you at both of these different places is because they are like, how do we talk to doctors? Like, they're sitting there going like, I don't know how to talk to doctors, but you're like the person they hire to talk to doctors. So it's like, we're all just people with different backgrounds and have things to learn from each other. So
absolutely. And no matter how much analysis someone has done, they will not know your space better than you. And that is the truth at the end of the day. And so I think once we all understand that and accept that, I think it just becomes so much easier, right?
That's great. I am really excited that we were able to chat today. I loved hearing about your journey. For anyone that wants to reach out to you, is LinkedIn a good way to connect?
Yep. It's perfect.
Absolutely. Okay, so we'll put your LinkedIn into our show notes. It's CK Wang, and the company is Coda, COTA, healthcare.com, correct?
Correct.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for listening. I hope this was inspiring to you also, that you can use your clinical knowledge as your foundation, as your jumping off point. You can say yes to things. You don't have to delete the emails. Even if you're not great at computers, you could work at a tech company. So we build skills over time. We build networks over time. And these become invaluable as we continue to grow. So we have to approach with a growth mindset and keep doing uncomfortable things. So thank you so much, CK, for coming on the show today.
Thank you, Allison.
Thank you for listening to Startup Physicians. Don't forget to like, follow, and share.